Hi, good morning. So I think if you look at the whole picture of the world, it's a right time to discuss this topic about mitigation and adaptation solutions, navigating the trilemma of the economic growth, resilience, and low carbon. I'm so happy and honorable have two panelists, Dr. Mattsson and Dr. Bambang. So we would like to focus on three type of questions. The first one is what kind of the methodology? How can keep the use a balanced way to keep the balance among of the economical sustainable development and carbon neutrality, low carbon or zero carbon, and with a resilience methodology. So just like the Secretary General of the UN, Antonini Guterres said on COP 27, we are driving on the highway to climate hill, and our feet are still on the gas pedal. It is. So to keep these three things growing sustainable is kind of impossible three triangle theory. Mitigation and adoption of the economic growth, resilience, and no carbon, zero carbon. This is so-called sustainable development goals. Today we use ESG, USG methodology. So anyway, the first question is I would like to give to Dr. Mattsson. So Dr. Yan, yes, you have so much experience and practical experience in the sector of the ESG and zero carbon, carbon neutrality, and green finance and investment in the sector of in the public sector and the private sector. Currently, you are starting your own business with co-founders of the Everimpact, focus on carbon investment and carbon management and solution provider for the city, for the public, for the corporation. So may we share your experience and learn about your kind of comment, how we keep the three issues sustainable development, just like ESG work in Europe. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, and hello everybody, good morning. Actually, I was reflecting a little bit with the title of this session of Trilemma, and we look at dilemmas as quite uncomfortable places to be in, as the expression goes, between a rock and a hard place, and how to deal with the situation. I think it's wiser to look at this situation of sustainability not as a threat, but as an opportunity. As a matter of fact, to be a little bit more provocative, sustainability starts with an S, and I think you can either be smart or stupid as you approach sustainability. You're smart if you look at the opportunities of getting ahead, and you're stupid if you, like an ostrich, bury your head in the sand and kind of forget about it or look very short-term at profitability, which must be maybe okay for a while, but in the end, you will not be successful if you ignore sustainability. So if you're a company, which is what I'm mostly involved in right now, I think you do very wisely of embracing ESG, environmental and social governance aspects. And there are many ways of getting ahead of the game, of being a leader in your sector, or at least a fast follower. I hope there's time to get into a little bit more detail on how best to embark on this kind of journey, and I don't want to take too much time here initially in our conversation among panelists. But obviously, also coming from the United Nations, I would strongly encourage those of you who have either a startup company or are in a more established company to look at the United Nations Global Compact and its 10 guiding principles dealing with environmental and social, as well as good business practices, anti-corruption, etc., as a starting point. But if we have a little bit more time later, I would like to be more concrete on how to go about this. But maybe I could just make another pitch like I did for the UN Global Compact, where I encourage you to become a member, and even a startup company can become a member. And by the way, if you're a startup, and I know there are many startups here, this is really a good opportunity to build in ESG, sustainability, into your DNA from the very beginning. If you're a well-established company, you've been around for a long time, you have to sort of retrofit, and that is even harder. Whether you're a startup or an established company, another piece of advice is that you look at an organization called World Benchmarking Alliance. So it's www.worldbenchmarkingalliance.org. I happen to be on their board, so that's why also I'm promoting it. They have selected the 2,000 most influential companies in the world in different sectors. And they are measuring them in terms of how well they do in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can go in and look at the best and see how they are doing, and use that as a guiding star for how you can do better as well, because for everybody it's a journey. You don't get there right away, but you have to work with ambitious goals for sustainability. So I think I'll stop here in order not to speak too long.
Thank you so much. But I still have one more question for Yan. If you look at the ESG, European is the most developed area for the public listed company. For the big to medium-sized company, you have to issue your ESG report, annual report. But in China, only 1/3 of the public listed company have asked to issue report. So any experience or any lessons can you share with to the Chinese to the emerging market or to the Chinese company for the ESG?
Well, I think the advice to the Chinese companies, frankly to any company, is to be very transparent with your goals and the data to support your goals. I think it's smart business. If you're a supplier, you will be asked the questions about your carbon footprint in your own manufacturing and supply. Not only carbon footprint, but also the social footprint. So you get those questions, so you better get your data right. I'd like to go on and give some other examples. So not only in the commercial aspect directly with suppliers and what have you, but also when it comes to the customers, reputationally, they are looking for products that are manufactured in a socially and environmentally responsible way. So that impacts your market with the consumer. And also with your staff, and this is very much a trend in Europe. Since you asked about Europe, I think that's where I saw the data. They checked with young professionals looking for their first or second job. If they have a choice between two companies, one that is doing better sustainably than another, guess which one they pick? They don't pick the one with the highest pay necessarily, but the one which does best on a sustainability front. So even when it comes to attracting the best talent, it makes a lot of sense to be responsible sustainably and to present the data in a transparent way. Actually, in a similar fire chat, there was a chairman of one of the big oil companies, I think it was Shell, and he said he had worked in that company the whole career. When he started, they got the best engineering students, but now they didn't any longer because of their carbon footprint. So to try to do well on sustainability and to report transparently, I think it's very important for you to be competitive and successful as a company.
Okay, thank you so much. So Dr. Bambang Brodjonegoro, sorry about that. Sorry. So yes, Willow, you had been service for the public sector at least 20 years. You was a financial minister and for ministers quite a long time. You have very experienced and still including some lessons or can share best practice, can share with the audience, but how use a green finance or make the, you are one of the policy maker of the Indonesia to use a green finance, a green infrastructure, and just clean energy and carbon, try to keep the things carbon neutrality, to keep the Indonesia sustainable, economical sustainable development. So can you, if you don't mind, can you share your experience and your advice on how keep the user policy to keep the sustainable development? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and glad to be part of this Beyond Expo. I think the word trilemma here, I think is very much interesting because the word trilemma will give the direction to the public sector, to the government, that the challenge to adopt with this climate change, I think will be very much challenging. And certainly, public sector or government needs the cooperation, needs to get private sector to participate, both in financing as well as direct investment in, for example, renewable energy. So for the case of Indonesia, the biggest source of emission actually coming from forestry and land use, because our country is quite unique in which we have the largest rainforest in the world. So basically, source of emission coming from deforestation that especially happening in the past, plus, of course, the issue with the land use. But then there is a second source of emission that's also significant, which is coming from the energy, both from the power plant as well as from the use of energy and transportation. So the governments, once we are committed to the Paris Agreement, and whenever we attended COP, we are trying to design the strategy to fulfill our ambition. And whenever we are trying to fulfill our ambition, public sector or government cannot work alone or by itself. We really need to get private sector on board. And how can we bring the private sector on board? There are several types of policies. Number one is through tax incentive. I think tax incentive is very much important, and especially the government is going to apply the carbon tax. I think the carbon tax will be a good way, at least to create awareness for private sector. You have to behave according to the spirit of green economy. Otherwise, either you have to pay the tax or you have to find the offset of the carbon that you are producing. So I think it's a good wake-up call. But I think tax incentive itself will not be enough. The second type of policy is direct subsidy. Yes, in the past, our government used to give direct subsidy for fuel. Make sure fuel is affordable for majority of population, especially low-income family. But now, I think we need to shift the subsidy from subsidy for fossil into subsidy for renewable, then I think the economy of renewable energy will be very much better if there is a direct subsidy from government only for renewable energy. And in our case, there are five main sources of renewable energy. It could be from hydro, geothermal, biomass, wind, as well as solar. So I guess as a government, we need to encourage private sector to invest in all these five sources of renewable energy. Yes, I think I can see globally that now, especially from Europe, and also US, most of the so-called renewable energy as if only limited only to wind and solar. It's good. Of course, there might be some sources of wind and solar, but don't forget, those two are intermittent, meaning that we cannot fulfill the reliability of the electric system. We need the battery. The battery technology, unfortunately, is very expensive. So I think government needs to encourage, aside from those two, we also need to encourage the geothermal, the biomass especially. I think biomass is quite good. I believe in China it might work as well, and the hydro. So with this variety, then I think private sector will not hesitate to invest more, you know. And of course, the last option of the policy is how at that time, government trying to get so-called low-cost funding, low-cost source of investment. And it means we need to be involved in any green financing scheme. But unfortunately, at least until now, what I've been observing, still, most of the green financing available in the market, especially from private capital, still has, in my opinion, high cost of financing. It makes investors in developing countries like Indonesia a little bit hesitant to go into renewable energy, because if they see the cost of funding is not much different with cost of funding for coal, for example, then at least for short and medium term, they prefer to go to the coal rather than going for renewable energy. So at the end, globally, we need to promote what we are now trying to support, blended financing. Blended financing is basically the effort to blend the source of private capital, which is high-cost funding, combined with the support from philanthropy, support from multilateral development banks, and support from public budget. So we combine that, so from the high-cost financing become relatively low-cost financing. So I think those are the three strategies that any government in the world, especially on developing economy, needs to do in order to accelerate the energy transition and also adaptation to climate change.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are so much learning. One more question for you. You know, to keep this economic sustainable, green economic sustainable development, we do need to bring the private on board. You know, private, they passionate, they enough investment, the flexibility, so many things we can nurture from the private. So my question is, how can we bring the private into the green economical sustainable development? So any advice?
Yeah. Few years ago, I was in charge for effort to achieve sustainable development goals in Indonesia. So when I was in charge, then I learned that the so-called sustainability has to cover not only environmental sustainability, but also economic and social sustainability. So the strategy here is how we can mainstream the spirit of sustainability into our daily life, including the daily life of private sector, meaning the sustainability has to be part of the core business of private sector. How can they do that? Yes, in the beginning it was difficult, but then we learn from multinational companies, we learn from companies in developed economy, and then we find out, I think the one that promoted by UN, the impact investment. So investment has to come, of course, mostly come from private sector. They will be looking for financial return. But then financial return itself will not be in line with the spirit of sustainability. So to combine that, we need to emphasize, for example, on economic sustainability as well as environmental sustainability as a part of our core business. And as Jan mentioned, we have to look at, from private sector point of view, they need to look this sustainability not as a burden, not as a cost, but more as an opportunity. Opportunity to get higher profit. And I believe now with the help of technology, including digital technology, then at least in my opinion, it is easier to mainstream the sustainability into your core business. And the spirit of impact investment, I think, needs to be promoted to majority of private companies. Because I think whenever they can see a good return, then they will be into it, rather than avoiding that.
If I may just chip in here, Bambang, since you gave
Sure,
me the
sure.
lead. If you look at some of the big companies that have embraced sustainability early on and become leaders within their sector, have gained very good reputation among customers, I think we have good models for exactly that opportunity that exists in sustainability. Take, for example, Unilever. If you compare them with Heinz, that had not the same objectives, Unilever did better on their markets. They grow faster, the investors like them better, they did better on the stock exchanges. If you look at, maybe you have read the book Net Positive of Paul Polman. It's like a handbook on how to run a big company in a more sustainable manner. So that's something I recommend to you. There are other companies that are very good models. Well, Tesla, that was so early in the electric vehicles, is known to everybody. The Brazilian company in the health sector, Natura with Body Shop and those kind of brands that consumers like because they are more sustainably sourced and fair trade oriented. The Swedish furniture company IKEA is another good example of very responsible sustainability from the sourcing all the way through Patagonia, the clothes, outdoor clothes company. So there are many, many good examples. If you're a startup, many of the successful startups now, they position themselves in terms of their products and services in sustainability as well. And that's what I want to come back to as well as an opportunity for startups, not only to have a product that fits into this sustainability architecture of today and tomorrow, but also that they operate sustainably as well. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that later on if there's time.
Okay, thanks, Fian. Yes, I fully agree with you too. If we look at the private sector, how the private sector to support the green economic sustainable development, I think they are the major force. I just returned from Middle East, from Oman, the capital of the Jordan, 2 weeks ago. I lead a big Chinese investment group who focus on clean energy. They're trying to explore the market in the sector of the solar power station, gravity energy storage, and waste to energy market in the Middle East. Yeah. So, given my gut feeling, I found the private, the big boss, They are all from the top 100 public listed companies. They use a three methodology to keep the green economic sustainable. The first one, they use a most advantageous technology in green technology into the actual economic development. For example, they don't have to seawater distillation for hydrogen energy production. They don't have to let the seawater into the regular water. They directly use the seawater into the convert into the hydrogen energy. So I think this is a kind of very technology based. They use the sonar from at the beginning and the seawater, and then the final product is a hydrogen, and convert hydrogen into ammonia, and ship back to China or ship back to the other the final market. Yes, of course, it's still convert into the methanol into convert into methanol to the other areas. As a second, they work with the government, local government very well, getting along with the government very well. They learn about the policy, the local policy regulations, and invite the retired minister or the other senior person to join their team to get used to the local investment climate. So just like at the first step, they down to the earth to benefit, to use this methodology to benefit for the public, to benefit to the local. And the last but not least, they use the ESG methodology criteria to manage their company outbound of China, to use to keep the environment protection. That's E, S, and social responsibility. They play the full responsibility to the social, to the social. For example, they donate the fund. They set up the charity foundation to co-work with the local NGO to support the disabled people, to support the set up the training school for the women, empower the minority, the women for the local economic sustainable development. Anyway, so I think this three methodology is quite important to help the private company into the whole picture of the SDG and green economic sustainable development. Anyway, so we still have 7 minutes. So Bambang and Yan, do you want to? We just free talk about or send your message. Yeah.
At the beginning, we are thinking about the trilemma, and sometimes in the developing country, there would be dilemma between economic growth and adaptation of the climate change. But I like to quote the latest survey done by World Economic Forum, in which they are trying to identify the biggest risks, the biggest global risks in short and medium term. So 2 years and 10 years. For short term, 6 out of 10 biggest risks related to climate change. But then when we are looking on medium term, which is 10 years, the top 3 are all related to the climate change. Meaning that actually there will be no more dilemma or trilemma. Now, for us as human beings, the challenge is resilience. Resilience against the climate change. Remember, one impact of the climate change that happens, I believe including in China, is natural disaster, hydrometeorological disaster, flood, landslide, even drought. They are all part of hydrometeorological disaster originally caused by this greenhouse gas emission or by the climate change. So I believe my last remark is that there will be no more exercise or ideas about climate change, because now the game is resilience against the climate change itself. Thank you.
I totally embrace what you said. We're really faced with a very, very big challenge in the world, and there's urgency to do something about it. And we need all hands on deck, everything from good government policy to responsible practices by businesses, to our individual roles as consumers or employees of companies. We all need to work in the direction of doing something about this to mitigate climate change, to reduce the footprint, the carbon footprint in our operations, in our daily lives, and to become more resilient as well, because even if we do better than the dire predictions that exist, there is still a need for a lot of adaptation to changing circumstances. But again, in order not to look too dark and pessimistic about this dire situation that actually is out there, I want to emphasize the opportunities that exist for those that are creative, that are innovative, that are able to change the mindset and the culture of actually seeing an opportunity and doing something about it. Therefore, to be in a place like this, with all the startups and all the established companies and seeing the new technology, I think gives somebody like me still promise for the future. That there's so much talent around, and when that talent is increasingly focused on sustainability more broadly and climate change in particular, which is such a big threat to the planet and to mankind, it does give me hope. And we benefit from individual action, but also from working more together across sectors, across companies, academia, because that's how we, in the end, get results locally and globally, because we only have this one planet.
Yes, we still have 2 minutes around. Any question from the audience? Just raise your hand if you have any question for three of us or for an individual. Question? No question. Okay.
So we have volunteers on the stage who has a microphone. So any audience, you have, it's a great chance to ask a really brilliant speaker's question. Is any? So I actually, and thank you so much for the wonderful sharing. I think one of the reasons like we put up together this panel with Trilemma. Okay, we got one. Okay, we'll give it to you in a second. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, wait. Thank you so much. So my name is Song Shi, and I'm also today's moderator too. So I have a question. You guys have a very inspiring talk, and I'm really curious about what do you think? Because in current days, we know that the developing countries and developed countries, they are not on the same page in the field of ESG development. So I was curious about, maybe this question is towards three of you. What do you think about how we can get to the same page in the field of ESG development in the future for both developed countries and developing countries? And this just reminds me of my experience in COP27 last year, because it was highlighted again about the climate synergy. So how we can synergize this development in ESG. Thank you. This is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your question is very much relevant, because that's what at least we are experiencing now as a developing country. We still believe that, yes, of course, we contribute to the source of emission globally, but developed economy should lead the effort of doing adaptation to the climate change. at least for green financing resources. They have the green financing resources, but they still treat this green financing as if all the business, all the activities done in the developed economy, with all the risk methodology, with all the high cost funding that they still have. I believe what works in developed economy today might not work very well in developing economy. So there has to be some kind of understanding, and there has to be the role of international organization, including the World Bank, the UN, to mediate between developed economy, expectation and developing economy challenges. I think there has to be effort so altogether developed and developing economy can battle together for the adaptation of climate change.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I can share with you that I've, in my career, been part, for example, of these COP meetings, the climate negotiations, and very clearly there is a gap between the industrialized world that has caused most of the problems because the CO2 stays in the atmosphere for 300 years, right? So it's since the early days of industrialization, which was very dirty, and for most of the time. As a matter of fact, my generation has behaved very irresponsibly, and especially in the north and the industrialized countries. So there is a gap, and there are differences, and it is disappointing that there is not stronger emphasis from the north or from the industrialized world to finance the necessary investments in the global south. There's been a lot of talk about this, a lot of promise, but still not enough action. So more is needed there. But then looking at the opportunities again, I do think that companies, like we're talking about the Chinese companies, and I mentioned this World Benchmarking Alliance with the 2,000 most influential companies in their sectors. Almost 250 of those are Chinese companies operating not only in China, but globally. And they need to do a little bit better, to be honest. They need to be a bit more transparent. It's very hard to get data, and they have to be a little bit more ambitious as well. Not reluctantly, but actually as a way of being even more competitive in their business, doing even better in their business, not in the short term, but in the medium term and the longer term. So I think there are important responsibilities also for the private companies in the global south to take care of this one planet where we all are. So there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of responsibilities. I realize it's a journey and it takes time, but it's urgent. It's urgent.
Thank you for the great remark. I think it's a great question to end this conversation. We do need a standardized language. We have like 7 more years until 2030 of the SDG goal. At COP27, we talk about loss and damage fund, reform the MDB, like World Bank. All the important discussion cannot be delivered without participation of the private sector, as Professor Bambang mentioned. And then we need data. We need the data to ensure the integrity and transparency. And then we need an underground project like Dr. Xiang is leading in his career. So thanks again.